Act 5 of Othello has to be the most difficult act in all of Shakespeare to read or watch. It's absolutely gutting to watch Desdemona beg to have an hour or more of life, to know that it's all based on a lie. In this humble video essayist's opinion, it's the most tragic scene in all of Shakespeare. It's both riveting and horrifying. So today, I'm gonna masochistically do a deep dive on this act, force myself to watch and engage with the action. Specifically, I want to focus on Shakespeare's treatment of silence in this act. In these final scenes of the play, characters are going to be permitted to speak. Some are going to be called upon to speak. Some are notably not going to be called upon to speak. Some defiantly choose to speak even when demanded to be silent. And some choose to be silent even when demanded to speak. And finally, some will be silenced forever. This video is part of a 7-episode series on Othello, and if this sounds like it might be your kind of thing, please consider subscribing and checking out my other videos on Othello, Measure for Measure, The Merchant of Venice, and A Midsummer's Night's Dream. And with that bit of housekeeping out of the way, let's go through Act 5 play-by-play. Act 5 begins in the dark. Iago has inspired Roderigo to attack Cassio, and in his final soliloquy, he informs us, his complicit audience, that he has a lot at stake in this fight. Both characters kinda have to fall. Cassio stabs Roderigo, and unseen, Iago stabs Cassio in the leg. As Lodovico and others enter the stage, Iago pretends to be responding to their cause. He takes revenge on Cassio's behalf by killing Roderigo and then binds Cassio's leg. He appears valiant to the others. He is, as always, messing with everybody's perception. And then Bianca enters the stage, and she's genuinely concerned for Cassio. Iago, however, starts crafting a story about what has happened and blames Bianca. And, I mean, poor Bianca. Since Act 3, Iago has been using the cultural prejudice against women who have sex outside of marriage in a number of ways. He links this practice, extramarital sex, to a general dishonesty for some reason. He has claimed that the testimony from such a woman is not to be trusted and has convinced Othello to adopt this position as well. So Bianca, in this scene, is an easy place for Iago to shift blame onto. Bianca is what Othello and Iago have accused their wives of being, but Bianca's presence in this scene, her physical reality, refutes the premise upon which their ideology is founded. She's caring and brave and honest throughout this entire play, and in particular this scene. Iago wants us to see any woman who enjoys sex as immoral, dishonest, or malicious, but that's just not Bianca. She genuinely seems to embody the opposite of those characteristics. She cares about Cassio, and here she stands up for herself. She responds to Iago and Emilia, who has joined them on stage, by saying, "I am no strumpet, but of life as honest as you that thus abuse me." And in doing so, she claims an equal right to testimony of her own, to speak on her own behalf, a right that won't actually be provided to her. Anyway, during this nighttime brawl, Othello hears Cassio scream that he's been stabbed and leaves the stage believing that Iago has fulfilled his promise, and he leaves to fulfill his part of the pact, to kill Desdemona. Which takes us to Act 5, Scene 2, the play's final scene. It begins with Othello watching Desdemona sleep, depressed by what he feels he needs to do, but rationalizes that he must do it or else she'll betray more men. Having bought into Iago's script of patriarchy, this is something he must do to defend men, all men. And eventually, these musings wake her up and he tells her to pray. He wants to give her a chance to make peace with God and basically tells her that he's going to murder her. His stated reason is that she gave the handkerchief to Cassio. To defend herself, she swears that she did not and begs Othello to call Cassio in to prove it. "Send for the man and ask him," she says. This is exactly what Othello asked the Duke to do in Act 1. "Send for the lady to the sagittary and let her speak of me before her father." If you have questions that concern somebody, call that person in, get the full story. But Desdemona is not permitted this right. He basically tells her that this isn't a trial. She's already been convicted and she sits on her deathbed. When Othello eventually tells her that Cassio cannot be called because he believes that Iago has murdered him, she says, "Alas, he is betrayed and I undone," which is painfully ambiguous. As I researched this play, I learned that Othello has more documented cases of audience members who try to interrupt the performance than any other Shakespeare play. And those interruptions happen in this scene. People trying to stop Othello from doing what he's about to do. And I get it. When Desdemona says that Cassio is betrayed and I undone, I want to stand up and clarify that statement for her. The English teacher in me knows that her use of the passive voice here obscures the subject. Othello could easily hear that line and fit it into his own narrative of events. It's ambiguous. He could easily believe that she's saying that their affair has been revealed, that the revelation is the betrayal and it's her undoing. But that's not what she means, so it's really hard to watch. When Othello gets angry, she switches strategies and begs for just a few more moments of life. Her appeal to bring Cassio in was an appeal to reason. When that fails, she attempts an emotional appeal. But this also fails as he begins to smother her. And the method of killing here is important. He's taking away her voice. He's silencing her through smothering. Throughout this play, the ability to testify for oneself, to craft one's own story, has been important. As I've noted throughout this series, vision and sight have been important ways of accumulating knowledge, but speech has been the primary site of identity construction. Othello has earned his position within Venice society through his ability to craft an identity for himself. Desdemona loves him because she saw his visage in her mind after hearing him speak, through his storytelling and the promise of acquiring a similarly adventurous identity of her own. Iago has crafted an identity for himself as an honest and loyal ensign through his speech. He's convinced Rodrigo that he's a friend, Cassio that he's an ally, and Othello that he's the arbiter of truth and a reliable narrator. This is all done through the ability to testify on one's own behalf. Desdemona's death is accomplished in such a way as to silence her speech, to silence her ability to speak her truth and construct her own narrative. That's gotta be on purpose. In the middle of this murder, he's interrupted by Emilia, and he's unsure whether or not he's successfully suffocated Desdemona. So he closes the curtain and confronts Emilia, who tells him that Rodrigo has been murdered and Cassio lives. At which point, Desdemona offers another ambiguous statement. Oh, falsely, falsely murdered. Is she speaking of herself or is she speaking for Rodrigo? Emilia's response appropriately is to yell for Desdemona to speak again, to tell her story, to offer her testimony that has been smothered out of her. This is exactly what she needs to do, not remain silent, take control of her story. And Desdemona responds to say that she is dying a guiltless death. When Emilia asks her to tell her story, who has done this to her, her response is, nobody. I myself. Farewell. Commend me to my lord. Oh, farewell. And this is a really interesting response. First, she defines herself as nobody. She's adopted the subordinate position that Othello has forced her into throughout Act 4. Second, it's a lie coming from a person positioned within this play as the paragon of virtue. And third, she's protecting Othello. And for me, this is a perfectly crafted line. She's performing the identity Othello has forced her into, a nobody, but simultaneously, she's maintaining a part of herself that she's had since the start of the play. She defends the people who are important to her. She defended Emilia in the docks on Act 2. She defended Cassio throughout Acts 3 and 4. And here, she defends Othello. She is a person who, throughout, has spoken truth to power, and here dies by telling a lie. But somehow, that lie preserves the identity she's aspired to and exemplified throughout the play. She lies to protect somebody that she loves. Othello seizes on that lie to say that she's gonna burn in hell, and that provokes a fire in Emilia that we have not yet seen. After learning that Othello acted this way based on the testimony of her husband, she starts shouting for help even though Othello threatens her with a sword. She won't be silenced. When Iago and the others join the room, she directly accuses her husband of lying. She ignores his demands that she be silent, and she speaks on behalf of Desdemona, who is now forever silent. In all the other previous scenes, when Iago insults her or tells her to leave, she quietly does so. But here, she gets a bit of the warrior in her. And I love this. Just as Desdemona, the truth-teller, dies by telling a lie, Emilia, the woman who earlier lied about the handkerchief, is going to die by speaking the truth. She resists silence and Iago's sword and gives an unvarnished testimony of how the handkerchief found its way to Cassio. The symbol of the handkerchief has come back into order, and Othello realizes what he's done. He runs to kill Iago, but is stopped. And because everybody's energy went to stopping Othello, Iago takes the opportunity to kill Emilia and run away, though he is caught before he can escape. Othello apologizes to Cassio and demands that Cassio ask Iago why he did what he did, because we need answers from this guy. But Iago's response is classic. He says, "Demand me nothing. What you know, you know. From this time forth, I never will speak word. What we know, we know. That's all he's going to give us. It's up to us to craft the story of evil, for why people undermine and destroy the lives of others even when there is no benefit in it." Iago is going to be silent on the subject, so we're left to understand the origins of hate on our own and for ourselves. The response of the people on the stage is to ask Iago if he really means it, like he's not even going to speak to pray. But we all know that for Iago, there is nothing to pray for or to. He stays silent, and finally, Othello simply confronts Cassio about the handkerchief. Finally asks for the testimony that would have acquitted Desdemona, though it's obviously too late. And that brings us to Othello's famous last speech. In it, he commands the people on stage, and all of us in the audience, to avoid silence, to speak. He says, "When you shall these unlucky deeds relate, speak of me as I am, nothing extenuate, nor set down aught in malice. Then must you speak of one that loved not wisely, but too well. The man who was so good at telling his story before he met somebody who could control the narrative better than he could, tells us that we now have control over his identity, over the way that he's going to be perceived in the future. Both he and Iago will be silent on the subject, so it's up to us." Notably, he tells us not to set down his story in malice. He knows better than anybody else on stage that when you view somebody through malice, you will view somebody incorrectly. He thought he knew Desdemona was false, and he saw it everywhere. He instructs us to do better. He then tells us one last story. It's a story of a Turk from Aleppo who wronged a Venetian. Othello took that Turk by the throat and smote him, just as he smites himself on stage with a hidden weapon. So Othello ends his life defending Venice. He proves his own honor by defending his wife's honor, and this means taking revenge on himself. He has a divided duty to both himself and the state, and dies defending the state, the values of Venice. From the start, his power and status came from his sense of honor, and so he also dies by returning to himself, just as Desdemona had. In a classic revenge tragedy, a protagonist is wronged by somebody and then has to decide upon the vengeance. In this play, Othello is convinced to do himself an injustice, to kill the person he loves and who loves him back. And so, it is revenge against himself that he must take. And he does it swiftly. And on top of that, he is an outsider in Venice who has committed himself to defending Venice against its enemies. Because of his position as an outsider, he comes to believe, with the help of Iago, that he is the enemy and protects Venice from himself. And he does it swiftly. I want to turn now to the issue of Othello's role as an outsider and discuss something that's been in the subtext of much of this summary and analysis over this video series: Iago's prejudice and Othello's blackness. In my final video, I'm going to look directly at the issue of race during the early modern period and the ways that the play Othello participates in and subverts the narratives forming around race during his time period. So subscribe if you want to be notified when that comes out in a couple days and for future seasons of Shakespeare Play by Play. Thank you for watching.